So today I am going to start first chapter of class 11th, that is the living world, which is part of unit diversity in the living world. Okay. Now this chapter, this living world, carries a weightage of one question. On an average, one question comes from this part. Sometime you will also find two questions. Okay. Now, so I have divided this chapter into 4 different units. Okay. So what is biology? So biology is nothing but it is the science of life form and living processes. Okay. So you observe different kind of organism, plant and animals on planet Earth, and these life forms are part of our which are part of our study. Okay, and that together constitute an important component of biology. Apart from that, we also have microbes which are not visible with naked eye, but that is also studied in this biology. Okay. Now, as you start this chapter, what you will observe, there is a name of scientist known as Ernst Mayr. Now, question is asked from this part, Ernst Mayr. This person, Ernst Mayr, is evolutionary biologist. Okay. So Ernst Mayr, who was an evolutionary biologist, and he is also known as Darwin of 20th century. Now, why we call him Darwin of 20th century? Because Darwin worked on origin of species, whereas this person, Ernst Mayr, worked on origin of species diversity. Okay, that means this person worked on origin of species diversity. Okay, so he worked on origin of species diversity, and he made this central question of evolutionary biology. That means all biologists started working on this topic, that is how such large number of species are present on planet Earth. Now, he is also responsible for a very important concept, that is biological concept of species. Okay. Now, what is biological concept of species? Biological concept of species means species are group of closely related individual morphologically similar, can interbreed. That means they can reproduce among themselves. Okay, and produce fertile offspring. That means as a result of reproduction, young ones will be produced, and those young ones, after attaining maturity, are also able to reproduce. And the basis of this concept, basis of this biological concept of species is they are reproductively isolated. That means individual of a species can only reproduce among themselves, not with the species of other, not with the individual of other species. Okay. So basis of this biological concept is reproductive isolation. Okay. This question has been asked n number of times. Okay. Now, so now we enter into the chapter. So this chapter is divided into 4 different units. That is, what is living? Okay. Then diversity in the living world, taxonomical category and taxonomical aids. So I have divided this into these 4 categories, that is what is living, diversity in the living world, taxonomic category and taxonomical aids. So we'll start with what is living. So how you define what is living, or what are the defining property of being living? So defining property of being living means these properties are present in all living organisms without any exception. So here 4 things are discussed, that is growth, reproduction, metabolism and consciousness. These 4 things are discussed in this. So what is growth? Growth is, first is growth. What is increase in mass and increase in number is twin characteristic of growth. That means there is increase in mass and increase in number, and a multicellular organism grows by cell division. Now when we talk about growth in case of plant and animal, in case of plant, growth is a continuous process. Okay, that means in case of plant, growth is open, indeterminate and localized. That means open means new cells are added continuously. Indeterminate means you are not able to determine the final size, and localized means it will take place only in those regions where cells are meristems are present. Whereas when we talk about animal, in case of animal, growth only up to a certain age. After certain age, growth will stop, but replacement of cell will take place. For example, RBC is replaced after every 120 day. Okay, now so if you are doing tissue culture, in vitro culture, by simple counting the number of cells under the microscope, you can determine the increase in number of cells. Okay, now whether this growth is a defining property of being living or not. So growth is not a defining property of being living. Why? Because non-living object also grow. If we take increase in body mass as a criterion for growth, mountains, boulders and sand mound do grow. For example, suppose there is sand mound, then again sand is deposited on outer surface, so its size will or its mass will increase. Okay, now but the problem is, in case of living thing, when you observe living thing, what you will observe, in case of living thing, new materials are deposited from within. That means growth is intrinsic. Whereas in case of non-living thing, new materials are deposited on outer surface. That means it is extrinsic. Okay, so first, growth also takes place in non-living thing. So this is one exception. Second, in case of unicellular organism like bacteria, suppose this is a bacteria, a simple cell division results in production of 2 daughter cells. This is reproduction, binary fission, and this is also growth. That means in case of unicellular organism, you are not able to distinguish between growth and reproduction, as they are mutually inclusive event. That means if one will take place, then another will also take place. Whereas in case of multicellular organism, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive event. So in case of unicellular organisms, we are not able to distinguish between growth and reproduction. And because of these two reasons, growth cannot be considered as defining property of being living. But intrinsic growth, that is growth from within, can only take place in case of living organisms, not in case of non-living organisms. So intrinsic growth is defining property of being living, but not growth as such. Okay, now second criteria is reproduction. So now what is reproduction? How you can define reproduction? Reproduction is a biological process which results in production of young ones which are similar or identical to their parent. Okay, similar in case of sexual reproduction and identical in case of asexual reproduction. That means organisms can reproduce by both asexual and sexual reproduction. Now, reproduction is required for continuity of generation. So there are various methods of asexual reproduction. Okay, like by production of asexual spore, then by budding, then by regeneration as observed in planaria, or by fragmentation of organism as in case of fungal hyphae, filamentous algae and moss proteinema. This question have been asked. Okay, now, so can we consider this reproduction as a defining property of being living? Reproduction cannot be considered as a defining property of being living. Why reproduction cannot be considered as a defining property of being living? Because there are various exceptions. In our society, we have childless couples. That means although couples are married, but they are not able to produce offspring. Then mule and hinny, khachar, which are cross of horse and donkey, are sterile. Then worker honeybee is sterile. Then in case of unicellular organism, we are not able to distinguish between growth and reproduction. Okay, so reproduction is also not a defining property of being living, but if something is reproducing, it must be living. But it is not necessary that every living thing should or must reproduce. That means reproduction is not a defining property of being living, but reproduction is a characteristic feature of being living. That means if something is reproducing, it must be living. So hence reproduction also cannot be all-inclusive defining character of living organism. Of course, no non-living object is capable of reproducing or replicating by itself. So reproduction is characteristic feature of being living, but not a defining property of being living. Okay, now another characteristic or property is metabolism. So metabolism is sum total of all the biochemical reactions which takes place inside a living organism or inside a cell, and this is essential for survival of an individual or survival of a cell. So metabolism is nothing but sum total of all the biochemical reaction. That includes catabolism and anabolism. Now, so these chemicals, small and big, belonging to various classes, size, function, etc., are constantly being made and changed into some other biomolecules. And these chemical reactions are together referred as metabolic reactions. Okay, and it takes place in all living organisms. Now these metabolic reactions can be carried out in cell-free system in a test tube. That means if a test tube have all the features which is present in our gut, and now you add protein into that particular test tube, digestion of protein will take place. So those reaction, an isolated metabolic reaction outside the body of an organism performed in a test tube is neither living nor non-living. Hence, while the metabolism is defining feature of all living organisms, without exception, isolated metabolic reaction in vitro are not living thing but surely a living reaction. Hence, cellular organization of the body is the defining feature of life forms. What it means? It means if you carry out that metabolic reaction in a test tube under in vitro condition, you are able to digest the protein, but that protein cannot be absorbed by wall of test tube, or waste product created during that process cannot be excreted out because there is no defined cellular organization. So metabolism as such is a defining property along with cellular organization. Okay, so this is a defining property, that is metabolism along with cellular organization. Now, most complicated feature of, or most complicated, technically complicated feature of living organism or property is consciousness. That is ability to sense their surrounding or environment and respond to these environmental stimulus, which could be physical, chemical or biological. So consciousness is ability to sense environmental stimulus, which can be physical, chemical or biological, and mount suitable stimulus. For example, suppose this board is hot. I place my hand here and suddenly I remove my hand. Why? Because this is emitting heat. So this is my response. So this ability is consciousness. And out of the all living organism, only human beings are self-conscious. Okay? And every living organism, whether it is prokaryote or eukaryote, are conscious. Okay? Irrespective of whether unicellular or multicellular, prokaryote or eukaryote, if something is living, it must be conscious. Okay? So we sense our environment through our sense organ. Plant respond to external factor like light, water, temperature and other organism, pollutant, etc. All organisms from the prokaryote to most complex eukaryote can sense and respond to environmental cues. One of the example of this consciousness is photoperiodic response. Okay? In case of plant that you will study later on in plant growth and development, there is photoperiodic response. With respect to changing day or night length, there is response by plant in terms of flowering. Then in case of seasonal breeders animals, okay, they breed only in particular season. Then migratory behavior in animal is determined by the duration of light. So all these are stimulus, physical stimulus to which organisms respond. Okay. Now, so how you can define a living organism? Okay. So living organism is defined as individual with the ability to self-replicate, self-organize, ever evolving, can respond to environmental stimulus, are together forms a living organism. Self-organize, self-replicate, that means reproduction, ever evolving, that is forces of natural selection can operate on that, and can respond to environmental stimulus is referred as living. Now a question arises. What you will say for a person who is lying in coma, whether he is living or not living? Okay. Now a person who is lying in coma is living, not dead. Although that person has zero consciousness, his or she is not able to respond to stimulus. Why we say so? Because consciousness is not a quality, it is a quantity. A person who is present in coma have zero consciousness at that point of time, but he or she can regain consciousness. Okay. So consciousness is not there in that person, but he or she can regain consciousness. Now question arises, how you observe if this living feature evolved or originate in a living organism? So property of tissue is not present in its constituent cell. It arises as a result of underlying interaction between those constituent cells. Okay. Similarly, property of organ is not present in its molecular component. It arises as a result of interaction between those molecular components. Such large number of underlying interaction at different level of biological organization results in an emergent property. That means a property comes out which is referred as life, which we observe. So properties of tissue are not present in the constituent cell, but arise as a result of interaction among the constituent cells. Similarly, property of cellular organelle are not present in the molecular constituent of the organelle, but arise as a result of interaction among the molecular components comprising the organelle. These interaction results in an emergent property at higher level of organization, and this phenomenon is true in hierarchy of organization complexity at all level. So this life, what we observe, is nothing but result of various kind of underlying interaction at different levels of biological organization. Okay. Then there is one important fact: all living organisms, present, past and future, are linked to one another by sharing one of the common genetic material, but to varying degree. This is very important point. What it means: in every living organism, genetic material is DNA. Basic structure of DNA is similar. So amount of DNA can vary, sequence of bases in DNA can vary, but basic structure of DNA is same. So all organisms are related to one another with respect to genetic material. So we are through with first unit.